Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Thunder Demon's Straw Hat Luffy by AaronTaichou. This is a story where Luffy ate the Rumble fruit, a logia-class devil fruit, and became a lightning man instead of a rubber man. Luffy also showed signs of haki at a young age, so Shanks decided to take him with them to train Luffy. Godlike Luffy. More serious/smart Luffy, who acts more like a captain, and quote-unquote, I don't own anything. Adios.
It had been a few days since Luffy and the crew had left the Twin Capes and began their journey to the first island on the Grand Line. They were currently sailing through calm waters while snowflakes rained from above. Luffy was sitting on the throne in the cold, drinking whiskey, while Zoro was off to the right sleeping in the cold. Nami and Negico couldn't take the cold, so the two of them were bundled up in winter clothes and staying in the kitchen where it was warmer with the two people who Luffy allowed to travel with them to Whiskey Peak. Usopp and Johnny were on the main deck building snowmen while Sanji and Yosaku were shoveling snow off of the ship. Luffy looked down at Usopp and Johnny, who went from building snowmen to having a snowball fight. Luffy sighed before he got an idea and smirked. "Hey, Usopp, Johnny," he called out, getting their attention. "If the two of you are going to goof off, at least train while you do it," he said, causing them to look at him with a puzzled look on their faces. "What do you mean, big bro Luffy?" Johnny asked while looking up at Luffy. "I mean have your little snowball fight while blindfolded," he said before taking a sip of his drink. "It will help train your observation haki," he said, causing the two of them to smile before running into the kitchen and grabbing their blindfolds before coming back out and continuing their snowball fight. Luffy then took another sip of his drink and looked up to the sky. As he looked up, lightning flashed above and thunder boomed overhead. It was loud enough to make everyone pause what they were doing and look at Luffy. "Don't look at me, that was nature," he said, causing them to go back to what they were doing. Luffy then noticed the wind was picking up and once calm snow shower turned into a blizzard. He sighed and reached into his coat and pulled out a square locket that was gold in color and attached to a golden chain that was connected to the inside of his coat. He used his thumb to flip open the locket and took a look inside. Inside of the locket was divided into two parts. Both halves had a log pose in it, but it was two different looking log poses. The upper half had a single log pose similar to the one Nami bought in Luge Town, while the bottom half had three log poses grouped together. Picture Jack Sparrow's compass. Luffy looked at the upper part of the compass and growled. "Something wrong, Captain?" Zoro asked from next to Luffy. Luffy closed the lock before and placed it back in his coat before he replied to Zoro. "It would appear as though my navigator is useless," he said before walking to the head of the upper deck and yelled out to the crew. "Alright, listen up," he yelled, getting everyone's attention. "Stop what you are doing and turn this ship around," he yelled out, confusing all of them. Nami and Negico heard what he said and came out of the kitchen to see why they needed to turn around. "Luffy," Nami said, getting his attention. "Why do we need to turn around?" she asked. Luffy looked at her with an emotionless look on his face before he replied. "Well, Ms. Navigator, if you were doing your job you would have noticed we are going in the opposite direction," Luffy said calmly, causing all of their eyes to widen. "Now if all of you are done being surprised, I would highly suggest all of you turn this fucking ship around," Luffy yelled, letting his temper show a bit before he went and sat on his throne and poured himself a full glass of whiskey before he chugged it all down. Luffy looked down and watched everyone panicking and scrambling about as the weather began to change again. Sanji and Negico were manning the rudder, Johnny and Yosaku were tying up the sails, Usopp was running around fixing damages while Nami was calling out orders. Luffy had thought about going down there and helping Nami, but he decided otherwise because he wanted her to get the experience. It was then Luffy realized that his first mate was nowhere to be seen among the chaos. He looked over the last place he saw Zoro and saw the swordsman was off to his right sleeping, causing Luffy's eyebrow to twitch in annoyance. "He's really sleeping. I'll let Nami deal with him," Luffy thought to himself with an evil smirk on his face. After about 30 minutes of chaos, everything finally was quiet and the ship was sailing in the right direction. It was at that point Zoro decided to wake up. He got up and stretched while yawning before walking over towards Luffy and spoke. "Hey Captain," he said, getting Luffy's attention. "Something has been bugging me for a while," he said, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow. "What's bugging you?" Luffy asked as he got up from his throne. "It's about those two people we picked up at the Twin Capes," he said, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes. "What about them?" Luffy asked. He was genuinely suspicious of those two since he met them. The only reason he agreed to take them to their homeland was so he can raid the island. "The names," Zoro said, confusing Luffy. "I'm quite sure I had names like theirs before, but I can't remember when or where," he said, causing Luffy to nod his head before he replied. "Keep an eye on them," he said, causing Zoro to nod his head. Luffy then walked behind Zoro and grabbed him by the back of his neck and dragged him towards the rest of the crew. "Captain, what are you doing?" Zoro asked as he was being dragged. Luffy didn't answer him. Instead he looked towards Nami before he yelled out to her.
"Hey, Nami." Luffy yelled, getting her attention. Luffy then tossed Zoro off of the upper deck towards the main deck where she was before he spoke. "My lovely vice captain was sleeping throughout that entire ordeal," he said with an evil smirk before he walked back over to his throne while the air was filled with screams of Zoro. Just as Luffy was about to sit down, Johnny's voice caused him to stop and turn around.
"Island up ahead," Johnny yelled from the front of the ship, getting everyone's attention. Everyone looked up ahead of them and saw an island showing through some mist. "So, that's Whiskey Peak," Sanji said as he lit a new cigarette. "Its landscape isn't like any island I've ever seen," Nijiko said. "Our first journey on the Grand Line comes to an end," Luffy said as he walked next to the crew and stared at the island. The island itself had an odd shape. There are several mountains that gave off an appearance of giant cacti. "Hey look," Nami said while pointing forward. "There's a waterway seems to go right up to the shoreline," she said as they began sailing inland. I am weighing the possibilities of monsters out there," Usopp said in a scared voice. "Well, it is a possibility, this is the Grand Line after all," Zoro said. Luffy then looked towards the bounty hunting duo and spoke. "You two go bring our 2 prisoners, we can use them as bargaining chips," he said, causing the 2 of them to run off to get the man and the woman. As the ship sailed further into the waterway, a thick fog appeared, causing everyone to be on guard. When Johnny and Yosaku returned with the man and the woman, they placed the 2 of them in front of Luffy and went to stand behind him. Luffy glanced down at the man and woman before he turned his attention back to the surrounding area. Even though he couldn't see anyone, he could clearly sense them. Playing it safe, he gave a mental command to the cloud containing all of the treasure to go up into the sky. "Hey, there is someone over there," Usopp said as he pointed off to the left side of the ship. Everyone looked over and saw the silhouettes of 2 people moving. "We should be on guard," Nijiko said as she pulled out her metal staff. Luffy didn't say anything, he simply looked ahead of the ship with narrowed eyes. As the ship sailed a little bit further and even more silhouettes have appeared. This time they were on both sides of the waterway and the sound of people cheering filled the air. As they exited the fog, everyone saw on both sides of the waterway there were people lined up cheering and waving as the ship sailed by. Everyone including Luffy was happening, and they all had one common thought in their heads. What kind of place welcomes pirates? They all thought as they stared the citizens of Whiskey Peak with a bewildered look on their faces. "Welcome to the Grand Line," one person yelled from the shore as the crew sailed by. "Greetings and good tidings, great travelers," another yelled. "We are happy to have you here at Whiskey Peak," someone else yelled out. The entire crew was stunned beyond belief because there is a town that welcomes pirates with open arms. While everyone else was stunned at what was going on, Usopp was relieved. "Those aren't monsters, it's people," he said as he let out a sigh of relief. "People who are welcoming pirates," Yosaku said in a surprised voice. "The Grand Line sure is a strange place," Johnny said as he shook his head. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro, however, were suspicious of the citizens and their behavior, while everyone else on the crew started smiling and waving back at the people. Sanji was ogling the girls. Usopp was putting on his brave warrior of the sea act, while everyone else smiled and waved at the people. Luffy looked to Zoro, who was standing off to his right, and gave a small nod telling him to keep his guard up. He then walked over to Nami and whispered in her ear. "When they fall asleep, I want you to do what you do best," he whispered, causing her to smirk before he nodded her head. As the ship docked, the crew walked down to the main deck, getting ready to exit with Luffy leading the way. At the back of the group were Johnny and Yosaku with Ms. Wednesday and Mr. Nine tied up. Every member of the crew exited the ship except for Johnny and Yosaku along with Ms. Wednesday and Mr. Nine. Luffy had told them to stay on board until he called for them. Down on the shore, Luffy and the crew were standing in front of a tall man with a small red nose and has blonde hair in a style that resembles a powdered wig, and was carrying a saxophone. "Welcome ma, welcome. My name is Igarappoi and it is my honor as mayor to welcome you to Whiskey Peak," the man now named Igarappoi said in a welcoming voice that Luffy did not trust. "My name is Luffy, thank you for welcoming us," Luffy said with a warm fake smile that the man bought. "You will find that this is a place that thrives on making liquor and music," Igarappoi said with a smile as spoke to Luffy. "Hospitality is a matter of pride in our town. The smiles run long and the liquor flows as bountiful as sea water," he said. "That's good to hear and all, however," Luffy said as his smile dropped. "We picked up 2 passengers on our way here who are from this town and promised us gold as payment for bringing them here, and I expect to have that gold or else. The blood in this town will flow as bountiful as the seawater," Luffy said in an emotionless voice, causing Igarappoi to take a step back before he spoke again. "Can I see these 2 people who you say are from our town?" he asked, causing Luffy to nod his head before looking back at the ship. "Johnny, Yosaku," Luffy called out, and 2 seconds later Johnny and Yosaku along with the man and the woman came out. "I believe they go by Ms. Wednesday and Mr. Nine," he said as he looked back at the man. As he looked at the man, he saw the man's face take on a pissed off look for a split second before he quickly hid it behind his happy smile. Oh yes, those two are from here, Igarupo said as he turned his attention back to Luffy. And do not worry, you will be compensated for returning these two back home. Now would you permit us to throw a party in your rival so we can hear cough cough asterisk ma, 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 your tales of adventure? He asked with a warm smile. Luffy placed his fake smile back on before he replied. We would be honored to, he said as he walked up and shook Igarupo's hand before the two of them turned to walk into the town. As they were about to walk off, Nami spoke to Igarupo. How long does it take the log pose to record this island's magnetic field? She asked while holding up her hand showing the log pose. Igarupo looked at her and smiled before he spoke. Oh, don't worry about that, he said as he walked towards Nami, causing Luffy to narrow his eyes while Nami looked at him with a confused look on her face. Such boring details will have to wait. Surely you would like to rest after your journey, he said as he placed his hand on Nami's shoulder. Now, let's prepare to party, sing and be merry, entertain our guest. Igarupo shouted, causing the townspeople to cheer loudly along with Sanji and Usopp. Igarupo led the crew in a small bar where everyone sat down and began drinking and eating. Luffy didn't trust anything about this town, so he pulled out his own drink and began drinking, and from the looks of it, the townspeople thought he was drinking something they gave to him. It was one big party inside of the bar. The band was playing joyous music. Sanji was flirting with every girl he saw. Usopp was telling his famous stories about defeating some monster. Nami and Nejico were having a drinking competition against a few of the townspeople, while Zoro and the bounty hunting duo were off in the corner quietly drinking. From what Luffy had observed, Zoro had told those two to keep their guards up and not to trust the people of this strange town. As the evening progressed, Luffy's crew along with the townspeople began to get drunk. It wasn't until midnight when Luffy started noticing his crew members started passing out one by one. At first, he just thought they drank too much, but when Zoro passed out, Luffy realized that their drinks must have been spiked because there was no way Zoro would pass out from the amount he drank. Deciding to go along with it, for now, he acted as though he had passed out as well in order to see what these people's objectives were. After pretending to be sleeping for the past hour, Luffy got up and snuck outside through the roof before jumping across to a nearby building and hid in the shadows. He could see standing out in front of the bar that he was just in was Igarupo talking to Ms. Wednesday and Mr. 9. It's good to see you again, Igarupo. I mean Mr. 8, said Mr. 9 as he stood in front of Igarupo. I see you two failed another mission, Igarupo said as he looked at the two of them. Before any one of the two of them could reply, a woman walked out of the bar dressed like a nun. No one had any high hopes of them completing that mission anyway, she said as she began to take the nun costume off. Why don't you go try and kill that whale? Mr. 9 yelled. Yeah, besides those pirates got in our way, Ms. Wednesday said in an annoyed voice. By the way, where are they? She asked while looking at the woman. They are all passed out inside. I had to doctor their drinks a bit, otherwise they would still be up drinking us under the table, the woman said. Good thinking, Ms. Monday, Igarupo said as he looked at the now named Ms. Monday. Now can you explain to me why it was necessary to put on that elaborate show for those idiots? She asked in an annoyed voice. I get that nobody wants to hear me whine, but it is my duty to point out the amount of food we wasted. We could have just ambushed them at the harbor, after all, we are already short on supplies, she said while placing her hand on her hip and staring at Igarupo. Calm down, before you question the validity of my plan you should see this, he said as he held up Luffy's wanted poster. When Luffy saw this he smirked. So, they're bounty hunters, Luffy thought to himself as he continues to spy on the group. 100 million berries, for that kid, the three of them screamed with eyes the size of dinner plates. Don't be foolish, appearances can be deceiving, Igarupo said as he placed the wanted poster back in his pocket. So what do we do now? Do we kill them? Ms. Monday asked. No, Igarupo said, surprising the three of them along with Luffy. If we kill them the bounty drops 30%. The government like to do public executions, he said in a grim tone. I see, Ms. Wednesday said. No, ordered, causing them to nod their heads. It had looked like they were going to reply, but before they could reply a voice stopped them in their tracks and caused their eyes to widen. Hey, sorry to interrupt, the voice said, causing the four of them to spin around and look at the roof of the bar. When they got around they saw Zoro standing there with his Kitetsu blade drawn along with Johnny and Yosaku each holding their basentos. Luffy was surprised that they were awake and the fact that he didn't sense them. You mind letting my friend sleep? He said as he stared down at the four. Yeah, it was a long and exhausting journey, Johnny said as he locked eyes with Mr. 9. So do try to keep your screams for mercy down. We wouldn't want to wake them, Yosaku added in an emotionless voice. When Luffy heard that he couldn't help but smirk. I think I've rubbed off on them a bit too much, he thought to himself. Just then the door of the bar opened and out came two men with guns. Hey Mr. 8, Mr. Monday. They yelled as they opened the door. Four of them escaped from the room while we weren't looking, they said, causing their eyes to widen. Four, they yelled, asked simultaneously. But there is only three of them here, Ms. Wednesday said in a scared voice. Where's the other one? She asked. Before anyone else to fathom a reply, Zoro spoke up. Don't you think it is time you come out of your hiding spot, Captain? Zoro asked while looking over to the building right next to the bar, puzzling everyone else. A few seconds later, out walked Luffy from the shadows of the building, chuckling to himself. Good job, Zoro, he said as he jumped across the roof. Your training is paying off, he added as he walked next to the three of them. Big bro Luffy, you're awake as well? Johnny asked, causing everyone to sweat drop. Luffy looked at him for a second before he shook his head and didn't bother replying to him. Instead, he turned his attention to the four individuals standing below them. You sneaky wretches, Mr. 8 shouted. You four should have stayed asleep with the rest, he yelled as more and more people began to gather. A true swordsman would never make such a mistake of letting his guard down, Zoro said, causing Luffy to smile. And judging from the cheap disguises, I'm guessing you're all bounty hunters, he said as he unsheathed another sword. Your specialty is robbing drunk pirates of fall for your hospitality, Luffy added in his usual emotionless voice. I count 100 of these scumbags, give or take a few, Johnny added as he adjusted his glasses. We'll fight all of you, Zoro said as he stared at them with narrowed eyes. You hear me? Baroque works, he yelled, causing all of their eyes to widen in shock. Luffy was puzzled because he had never heard of any organization by that name. Ah, how do you know our name? Mr. 8 yelled out in anger and shock. Zoro simply chuckled before he replied. I was in a similar line of work once upon a time, he said while grinning. Your company came and tried to entice me with a job offer. Naturally, I declined, he said, causing Luffy and the others to understand how he knew about the organization. Do the same rules still apply? Employees' identity kept secret, cheesy code names, the boss's identity and whereabouts remain a mystery. Baroque Works, the fateful organization that carries out their orders like herded sheep, Zoro said in an amused tone, causing Luffy and the bounty hunting duo to chuckle. This is a surprise, Mr. 8 said in a cold tone. If you know all of your secrets, we are left with little choice but to kill you, he said in a grim tone as he stared at the four of them. Luffy chuckled before he summoned his thundercloud throne and sat down. You are welcome to try, Luffy said as he sat down. The three of you should be able to handle this. If I get involved, it won't be any fun, he said, pissing off the Baroque Works agents. You dare underestimate us, one random Baroque Works agent yelled out in anger. Yosaku chuckled lowly before he spoke to the person who yelled. Please, if anything, he is doing all of you a favor, because if he joins in the fight, all of you will pass from this world and into the next not really knowing what happened, he said, scaring a few agents. Luffy chuckled when he heard what Yosaku said. Enough, Mr. 8 yelled, getting everyone's attention. Kill them, he yelled, causing all of the Baroque Works agents to charge at the four pirates. Zoro and the bounty hunting duo looked at Luffy, who simply nodded his head, telling them to go. That was all the three of them needed before they jumped off the roof and started fighting the bounty hunters. Luffy simply sat in his throne and poured himself a drink as he watched his three crew members tear through the bounty hunters. As he was taking a sip of his drink, four random Baroque Works agents got the stupid idea of trying to ambush Luffy from behind. Of course, Luffy knew they were there, but he paid them no mind. The four agents didn't know what hit them as four lightning bolts shot out of Luffy's throne and pierced right through their chest, killing the four of them. Trash, Luffy said with a sigh before he turned his attention back to everything that was going on below him. Zoro was cutting through the crowd with ease, just as Luffy had expected him to. The thing that surprised Luffy was how good Johnny and Yosaku were at wielding a Basento. The two of them were cutting down the Baroque Works agents with ease similar to Zoro, and from the looks of it, their observation haki was improving the more they fought. Luffy had a proud smile on his face as he saw the way they are progressing, and they were progressing faster than Luffy had expected. Luffy was wondering if it was time to start their training in armament haki. As the fight progressed, Luffy observation haki alerted him of someone moving in the bar where all of them where the rest of the crew was sleeping. Upon further analyzing, he found it to be Nami, searching for anything of value that they might have. Chuckling to himself, he returned his attention to the fight. He noticed that Zoro was yelling at one of his swords. It was truly an odd sight to behold. A grown man talking to a sword. Well, Kitetsu III, you're quite sharp, but you are also quite the troublemaker, aren't you? Zoro said in an annoyed voice as he held the blade up to his face. A good sword only cuts when its master directs it to. Cursed sword or not, you will listen to me, Zoro said, not noticing one of the bounty hunters sneaking up behind him. The next thing Zoro saw was a small bolt of lightning fly past him, cutting off a few strands of hair at the base of his neck before hitting the bounty hunter behind him right in the head. Zoro blinked a few times before he looked behind him and saw a dead bounty hunter laying on his back with a smoking hole in the middle of his forehead. He then looked to see where the shot came from and saw Luffy sitting on his throne holding a smoking pistol. You need to pay attention, Zoro, Luffy scolded, causing Zoro to nod his head and turning his attention to his new opponent, Ms. Monday. Luffy turned towards the Johnny and Yosaku and saw them fighting against Mr. 9 and Ms. Wednesday. He then realized that someone was missing from all this excitement, and that was Mr. 8. Luffy then looked straight ahead of him and saw Mr. 8 standing in the very same spot as before, staring at Luffy with an angry look on his face. What seems to be the matter, Mr. 8? Luffy asked in a mocking tone, pissing Mr. 8 off more. Has the oh-so-mighty Baroque works beaten by a few measly pirates from the East Blue? Luffy asked, continuing to mock him. I wonder what your boss will think of all this, he asked, causing Mr. 8 to pale before he regained his composure and yell at Luffy. I will make you pay for all this, he yelled at Luffy before he blew into his saxophone and bullets came firing out towards Luffy. Luffy paid the bullets no mind and simply allowed them to pass through him, causing Mr. 8's eyes to widen. Now that wasn't very nice, lewd to mock him. Before Mr. 8 could reply, a loud high-pitched scream came from the area where Zoro was fighting. Luffy and everyone else looked over and saw Zoro holding Ms. Monday by the head, squeezing it before he let go, and she passed out on the roof. Two other screams came from where Johnny and Yosaku were fighting, and when Luffy and Mr. 8 looked over, they saw Mr. 9 and Ms. Wednesday passed out on the ground. The other Baroque Works agents were beyond scared at this point. They took out a single-digit agent, one random agent said in a frightened voice. And their captain hasn't even gotten up yet, said another. We are all going to die here today, said one man as he dropped his gun and fall to his knees. Luffy chuckled at their reaction as he watched Zoro and the bounty hunting duo make their way back to Luffy. Good job, you three, Luffy said as he got up from his throne and sent it back into the sky. From the looks of it, your hockey has improved even further, he said, causing the three of them to smile. What are going to do about the rest of them? Zoro asked as he turned his attention to the rest of the bounty hunters. Luffy smiles and looked at the bounty hunters before he spoke to them. I will give all of you a choice, Luffy said, surprising the bounty hunters. You can either leave Baroque Works and join me or die, he said, causing a few of them to tremble in fear. We will join. Why? Boom, the agent didn't get to finish his sentence before something hit him and exploded on contact, killing him and a few other agents in the surrounding area. Everyone was confused and scared at what just happened. Zoro and the bounty hunting duo looked at Luffy to see if he did that, but to their surprise, Luffy was as confused as they are. It would seem as though we have company, Luffy said lowly enough for the three of them to hear as he looked at a nearby alleyway. Oh my, it would seem as though some of you were planning on betraying Baroque Works, came the voice of a man from the alleyway that Luffy was looking. Out of the shadows of the alleyway, a man and a woman walked out. All of the bounty hunters were white as a sheet when they saw the pair. Luffy hypothesizes that these two were higher-ranking members of Baroque Works sent here to assist. By now Ms. Wednesday and Mr. 9 had woken up and crawled over to Mr. 8. The three of you lost against a couple of small-time pirates. Now that's just sad, the woman said in a condescending tone as he stared at the three Baroque Works agents. Mr. 5, Ms. Valentine, Ms. Wednesday said in shock. Can't do your jobs, Mr. 5 said. Kya ha ha ha. Well, that's clearly the difference between our rank and yours, Ms. Valentine mocked. You came here just to laugh at us, Mr. 8 asked angrily. Nah, that's a bonus, Mr. 5 said coolly. Kya ha ha ha. We are here under the boss's orders, Ms. Valentine said, earning Luffy's curiosity. Ha ha ha. With you guys here we can finally defeat them. They don't stand a chance against you, Mr. 9 said as she shakingly stood up. That's right, let's track him down and show him what Baroque Works can really do, Ms. Wednesday said. Seriously, Ms. Wednesday, stop with the jokes. We didn't come here to clean up your mess, Mr. 9 said as he placed his hands in his pocket. Did you really think we came all the way to the beginning of the Grand Line just to hold your hands? Ms. Valentine asked rhetorically. Oh, you are even more pitiful than you look, she chuckled. But what mission are you here for? Mr. 9 asked in a confused tone. Truth be told, Luffy was wondering the same thing. You mean you haven't figured it out? Mr. 9 asked as he took a few steps forward. There are people here whose crimes against the company are great enough that the boss has sent us here to deal with them. He said someone had learned the secrets. I don't know what secrets and I don't want to know. Obviously, someone else did, and that right there is against company rules, he said. Luffy could sense that Mr. 8 and Ms. Wednesday were beginning to get nervous and could only guess those two were the ones who had learned the secrets. Our company motto is the mystery. Everyone's identity is to be kept a secret no matter who they are. If someone is dumb enough to nose around the boss's business, well, that is a crime punishable by death, he said grimly. Well, it seems as though things just got interesting, Luffy said to Zoro and the bounty hunting duo. It would seem so, Zoro added as they watched the interaction. So, while we were conducting our search about who had learned the boss's secret, we discovered something. Kya ha ha ha, Ms. Valentine said as she spun her umbrella. As it turns out, a rather high-ranking individual from a certain kingdom managed to infiltrate Baroque Works, she said, causing Luffy's eyebrow to raise in surprise. A kingdom? Mr. 9 yelled out in surprise. But wait, I may wear a crown, but I am not a king or anything like that. I swear it is just an innocent little hobby, he said, pleading with the pair to believe him. Shut up, you idiot, Ms. Valentine shrieked in a high-pitched voice. You still don't get it. We need the people from Alabasta. They're the ones who angered the boss, Mr. 5 said coolly, surprising Luffy even further. At this point, Mr. 8 was shaking in fear as he stared at the ground. Before anyone could react, he pulled his bow tie and from the curls in his hair gun barrels poked out and fired 5 times on the pair of Baroque Works agents. "You will not lay a hand on our princess so long as the captain of Alabasta security still stands," he yelled as he fired 5 more times. "The princess of Alabasta," Luffy said as he stared at M's Wednesday. "I had heard that the princess went missing, but I never thought she would be working undercover in Baroque Works," he said. "Don't princesses usually have underlings to do those sort of things for them?" Johnny asked. "Yeah, they do, but Alabasta is currently in a civil war. So maybe all of her underlings joined the rebels," Luffy said jokingly. "What do we do?" Yosaku asked as he stared at the spot where the 2 Baroque Works agents were before they got shot at. "We watch for now," Luffy said as he turned and faced them. "Nami is still robbing the place. So we let them fight it out and create the distraction away from her," he said, causing the 2 of them to nod their heads before turning their attention back to the altercation. As the smoke cleared, everyone saw the 2 agents unhurt and unfazed by just being shot at. "Igaram, captain of Alabasta security and Princess Vivi Nefertari of the Alabasta kingdom, we have come here in the name of the boss of Baroque Works to see that you are eliminated," Mr. 5 said as he held up a picture of Princess Vivi. The princess was beyond scared. Her eyes widened in fear and her mouth kept moving, but words just won't come out. The other agents that managed to survive, Zoro and the bounty hunting duo, were staring at Vivi and Igaram in pure shock. Mr. couldn't believe the woman he had been working with for so long as a princess. Igaram then pulled his bow tie once more and started firing on the pair of agents again. "Go on, princess. You must escape," he yelled to the princess. "Igaram!" the princess cried out. Then all of a sudden one of the agents from inside the smoke fired out something at Igaram that exploded on contact. "Igaram!" the princess cried once more as Igaram fell face first to the ground. "Don't bother," came the voice of Ms. Valentine from above Vivi. Luffy looked up and saw her floating in the air looking down at the princess. "It would seem as though we got a pair of devil fruit users," Luffy said, surprisingly his 3 crew members. "If push comes to shove, I will fight them," he said, causing the 3 of them to nod before turning their attention back to the fight. "Princess," Igaram choked out as he lay on the ground. "You must get away from here, for the sake of our homeland. If something were to happen to you, our kingdom would crumble," he said, causing the princess's eyes to widen. "Escape from us, you must be crazy," Mr. 5 said as he picked his nose. "Kill me if you can take me," she yelled out as she took a defensive stance and started spinning something on both of her pinky fingers. It was then Mr. 9 got up and stood in front of the princess with his baseball bats in a defensive position facing the pair of agents. "We have been partners and have been fighting together for a long time. So get going. I am going to buy you some time for a head start," he told the princess. "Thank you, Mr. 9, the princess said, causing Mr. 9 to chuckle. "Pretty manly, don't you think?" he said before charging towards the 2 agents. Mr. 5 then pulled out a bugger from his nose and flicked it towards Mr. 9. The bugger sailed through the air and hit Mr. 9 right in the face. Upon hitting him, the bugger exploded on contact, surprising everyone that was watching. "Did that thing just come out of his nose?" Yosaku asked in disbelief. "Well, that's a strange ability," Luffy said as he stared at Mr. 5 with interest while ignoring the princess's screams for Mr. 9. Luffy was knocked out of his studying by the voice of Igaram, who apparently crawled to the base of the bar and was looking up at them. "Pirates, I have the most unreasonable request, but I require the help of someone with strength such as yourself." Luffy looked at him with a curious expression before jumping down from the roof towards Igaram. "Oh, and what might that request be?" Luffy asked as he sat on a nearby barrel and looked down at the bleeding man. "Both of those villains possess devil fruit powers and there is nothing I can do to stop them. So that is why I am begging you, please protect Princess Vivi of Alabasta in my place," he begged Luffy. Zoro and the bounty hunting duo were surprised beyond belief. First, he tries to kill them and now he wants them to protect a princess. Was he crazy? They all wondered about the bleeding man begging Luffy. "And why would I do that, huh?" Luffy asked rhetorically. "You were trying to kill me and my crew a few moments ago and now you want me to save your princess. Give me one good reason why I should help you," Luffy said in his usual emotionless tone. "You would be rewarded greatly if you return the princess of Alabasta to her kingdom. I am just a lowly servant, but I beg you please protect the princess," he begged. Luffy just stared at him with his cold eyes before he scoffed. "Reward? Yeah, right. I know Alabasta is in the middle of a civil war. You barely got enough money for yourselves, much less to give me," Luffy said coldly, causing Igaram's head to drop. However, Luffy said, getting Igaram to look up at him with hope-filled eyes. "I will protect the princess under one condition," Luffy said. "What is it?" Igaram asked with a voice filled with hope. "Whatever it is, I am sure the king would pay it if his daughter is returned safely," he said, causing Luffy to chuckle. "I will protect the princess only if once I return her to her kingdom. Alabasta becomes my territory," Luffy said, causing Igaram's eyes to widen in shock, along with Zoro, the bounty hunting duo, and Nami, who was hiding in the corner. I can't promise that," Igaram said sadly. "That is something only the king and the princess could do," he said, causing Luffy to smile. Then I'll just have to ask the princess, Luffy said before looking up at his 3 crew members. You 3 go protect the princess, I'll join you after I tie up a few loose ends, he said, causing the 3 of them to run off to the princess. Luffy then looked towards the remaining bounty hunters and spoke. Raging thunder. He yelled out, causing 50 bolts of lightning to come down from the sky and strike the remaining bounty hunters while thunder boomed overhead. Luffy then looked at the alleyway next to the bar and spoke. You can come out now, Nami, he said, causing his navigator to come out of her hiding spot. Hey Captain, she greeted as she walked up to Luffy. Did you find anything? He asked. No, they're completely broke, she said sadly, causing Luffy to chuckle. For a bounty hunter's nest they suck, she said. Luffy smiled at her before he replied. Don't worry about it, Luffy said, getting her attention. I didn't really expect much, he said before he got off the barrel. Treat his wounds for me, I'll go help those 3 out, he said before he turned his body into lightning and teleported away. Luffy landed on a nearby building close to where Zoro and the bounty hunting duo were fighting against the 2 agents. As he arrived, Luffy saw a slightly burnt Zoro fighting against Mr. 5 while the bounty hunting duo fight against Ms. Valentine. The princess was sitting on a rather large duck watching the fight. Alright you 3, I'll take it from here, Luffy said, getting everyone's attention. Upon seeing their captain, the 3 of them jumped and stood next to him. Luffy jumped down from the roof and started walking towards the par with a cold look in his eyes. Well, aren't you cocky, Mr. 5 said as he stared at Luffy walking towards them. Thinking you can take on both of us by yourself. We should teach this brat a lesson, Mr. 5, Ms. Valentine said with an arrogant smirk. Let's see how you like my bomb fruit, Mr. 5 yelled as he charged forward to punch Luffy with his left fist. Luffy simply covered his left palm with armament hockey and caught his fist with ease. I am possible, Mr. 5 yelled out in surprise. Luffy then covered his right in lightning and backhanded Mr. 5, sending crashing through 4 buildings. Ms. Valentine and the princess stared at Luffy with eyes the size of dinner plates. He just took out one of Baroque Works' top agents as though it was nothing, Vivi said to herself in a voice of pure disbelief. You monster, Ms. Valentine said in fear as he stared at Luffy, who was walking towards her.
No, not monster, Luffy said as he got closer. I'm more along the line of a demon, Luffy said before he turned himself into lightning and teleported right behind her and placed his index finger at the base of her neck and channeled a small amount of lightning, causing her to pass out on the ground. Luffy then turned towards the princess, causing her to back away in fear. Do not worry princess, I'm not here to harm you, Luffy said, surprising her.
Then why are you here? She asked with a voice laced with fear. I'm here to work out a contract, Luffy said, puzzling her. You see, Igaram asked me to protect you and return you safely to your kingdom, and in return, I want Alabasta to become my territory, Luffy said, casing her eyes to widen. What? She yelled out. Of course, he couldn't promise something like that. So, he told me to take it up with you. So here I am, he said as he walked over to a nearby box and sat down. And what exactly would we have to give you in return for being under your protection? She asked, causing Luffy smile. Nothing really, Luffy said, surprising her. The fact that I will have a big country like Alabasta as one of my territories will be enough to boost my reputation in the world, Luffy said, getting Vivi to understand now. Zoro and the bounty hunter duo didn't quite understand why Luffy wasn't asking for something else like some money every month or something like that as payment for his protection. That cannot be all, Vivi said, thinking along the same way of Luffy's crew. You are right, Luffy said, getting everybody's attention. But that is not a conversation that should be spoken out in the open like this, Luffy said, knowing very well that they were being spied on. But, do you mind telling me just why a princess like yourself is working in Baroque Works? Luffy asked while staring at the princess. The princess's face took on a sad look as she looked down to the ground before she spoke. As you know, Alabasta is in the middle of a civil war. One day I learned of a secret organization called Baroque Works. I found out our people were being manipulated by this organization, but that was the only information I could gather about this organization. I didn't know what to do, so I went to Igat him to help me infiltrate Baroque Works so I can see who was pulling their strings from behind the scenes and what exactly they were up to, she said, surprising them. Well, you got a lot of guts considering you are a princess, Nami said as she walked out of a nearby alleyway. Where is Igaram? Luffy asked. He said he will be here in a few, she said as she sat down next to Luffy. Something about some business he had to take care of, she said. So, did you manage to find out what their plan was? Johnny asked Vivi, causing everyone to look at her. Their plan is to create an ideal nation, Nami said, surprising Luffy and the others. That's what Igaram told me, she said. That's just a cover story the boss is using to cover their tracks, Vivi said as she clenched her fist. Their true goal is to take over the Alabasta kingdom, she said, causing Luffy to nod his head because that made more sense rather than some ideal nation. I have to get back home so I can warn everybody and stop all of the fighting, because if I don't, the princess said before she started to cry. Don't worry princess, Luffy said, getting her attention. If you agree to my terms I'll help you save your country, he said before he got up from his seat and looked up to the sky. By the way, did you ever find out the boss's identity? Luffy asked, causing her to panic. What? The boss's identity? You shouldn't ask that, Vivi screamed frantically. But you know, don't you? Luffy asked as he stared at her. Ask me anything but that, she screamed as she waves her hands frantically in the air. If I tell you, your lives will be put in danger too, she said, trying to make Luffy understand the danger while Luffy found it all amusing. Yeah, I'll pass, Nami said in a scared voice. This guy is trying to take over an entire country after all. I wouldn't want someone like that chasing after me, Nami said while sweating slightly. No, you don't, Vivi said in a serious tone. I don't care how strong you people are, you don't stand a chance against one of the 7 warlords of the sea, against Crocodile, she said, causing everyone to stare at her and blinked a few times before she and Nami screamed out. Ah, they screamed out. You know, for a princess you're not very bright, Luffy chuckled out. Then all of a sudden Luffy sensed someone behind them and spun around quickly, startling everyone. When everyone turned around, they saw a vulture and an otter standing on the roof staring down at them. Before the otter hopped onto the vulture and they flew off. It was truly an odd sight to behold in Luffy's opinion. Nami immediately began to panic and tried to leave, claiming that they didn't know what she looked like until the otter showed up again and held up 5 well-drawn pictures of all of them, causing Nami to sulk in the corner while Vivi apologizes to her. Well then, it looks like the 5 of us will be sitting at the very top of Baroque Works' hit list, Zoro said, causing Luffy to chuckle. It seems so, Luffy replied, sounding excited before he looked over to the princess. So princess, do we have a deal? Luffy asked, getting her attention. Seeing as how you were already involved because of me, I think I will take you up on your offer, she replied, causing Luffy to smile. We're all going to die, Nami cried and rocked herself back and forth as she hugged her knees. You have nothing to fear, came the voice of Igaram from behind everyone, causing all of them to turn back around. As they all turned around, Luffy and the guy immediately wished they hadn't turned around. Standing in front of them was Igaram dressed as Princess Vivi holding 5 dummies. My eyes, Luffy said as he stared at the Igaram. It's cough cough asterisk ma, it's going to be okay, princess, he said as he stared at the group. I've come up with a plan, he added, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow. Igaram, what are you? The princess tried to form a sentence but was too stunned by Igaram's appearance. I didn't know you were a cross-dresser, old man, Luffy said jokingly. Listen to me carefully, Princess Vivi, he said in a serious tone. Once Baroque Works intelligence unit learned about what happened here, agents will be sent after you immediately. And since they are aware that you learned the boss's true identity, you must, he said, but was cut off by Vivi. Yes, knowing them, they will send 1,000 agents after me, she said, scaring Nami even more. Thus my plan, disguised like this I will pretend to be you, Igaram said while looking down at Vivi. I will take these 3 dummies on board with me and I will sail a straight course to Alabasta, he said, causing Luffy to understand his plan. So, these dummies are supposed to be us, Luffy said while nodding his head. A decoy, Yosaku added. While Baroque Works is busy chasing after me, the rest of you will head to the Alabasta Kingdom following a less direct route, he said, causing Luffy to nod his head, understanding the plan. Hold on just a minute, Nami screamed as she got up. Who said we were going to take her with us and we didn't discuss the matter of payment? She yelled, causing everyone to stare at her like she was crazy. I decided that we are taking her and we already discussed the payment, Luffy said while looking at her with a bewildered look. Weren't you paying attention earlier? He asked. But what about Crocodile? She screamed once again. Relax, some measly warlord isn't anything to be afraid of, Luffy said while waving his hand in a dismissive manner. Now everyone was looking at Luffy like he had grown a second head. Besides, this sounds like it will be fun, Luffy added with a large grin on his face. We will be forever grateful, thank you, Igaram said before he walked over the water where a ship was docked and hopped it. Now Vivi will leave from here, Igaram said, imitating Vivi, causing everyone to laugh. Vivi and Igaram said their goodbyes and the ship sailed away from the island. He was alright, old man, Johnny said as he stared at the ship. Yeah, he was, Zoro added. Everyone was staring at the ship as it sailed further and further away. When the ship was about half a mile away from the island, it was suddenly swallowed up in a giant explosion, causing everyone's eyes to widen in shock. Holy shit, everyone get to the ship now, Luffy yelled to all of them. Johnny, Yosaku, Zoro, go grab the others, hurry, Luffy yelled out, causing the 3 of them to run off along with Nami. Luffy turned back to the explosion and spoke. I didn't think they would come after us so early, he said before turning to the princess who was frozen in shock. Luffy ran up to her and picked her up bridal style before teleporting back to the bar where the others were. As they landed in front of the bar, Vivi immediately jumped out of Luffy's arms and started looking around frantically. Where is he? Vivi yelled as she looked around. Where is who? Luffy asked as he watches Sanji, Usopp, and Nijiko get dragged out of the bar screaming. My duck, Karoo, she said, causing Luffy to sweat drop. We don't have time for this, he said before he picked her up again and teleported to the dock. When they landed on the dock, Vivi once again jumped out of his hands. I can't just leave him here, she yelled. We are all set. Let's go, Zoro yelled as he pulled up the anchor. What's wrong with her? He asked. She is missing her duck, Luffy said in an annoyed tone. Zoro looked at the two of them strangely before he spoke. You mean this duck, he said while pointing to the giant duck standing next to him. Luffy and Vivi stared at the duck before yelling out. He's already here, they yelled. He got here before I did, Zoro said. Vivi and Luffy got on the ship and they immediately set sail and began sailing up the waterway in order to reach the sea faster. As they were sailing up the waterway they entered a thick fog similar to the one they had when they came to the island. Finally, the sun is coming up, Nami said in a relief tone. I'm just glad that we got away from, came a female voice that didn't belong to any member of the crew. Luffy was cursing himself for letting his guard down so easily, but he now wanted to see how long it would take the rest of the crew to realize. You can say that again, Nami replied, not really noticing that someone had invaded the ship. With all this fog we need to be careful to avoid the rocks, the woman said again. Luffy was being patient not to react, but it was taking every fiber of his being to not turn around and blast whoever that was. I'll take care of it, Nami said happily before she blinked a few times and looked over to Luffy who was standing next to her. Did you just say something? She asked while looking at Luffy. Luffy looked over to her with a pissed off look on his face. It's nice of you to finally notice someone snuck onto the ship, Luffy yelled before he spun around and stared up at the second level and saw a woman sitting on the rails of the upper deck with her legs crossed. Upon seeing her face Luffy smirked and chuckled to himself. This is a nice ship, the woman said, causing everyone to panic and be on guard. It's you, Vivi yelled out while staring at the woman in fear, causing the woman to chuckle. I just happened to run into your dear Mr. 8 a little ways back. He didn't look so good, the woman said mockingly while looking at Vivi. So you killed Igaram, Vivi said grimly. You want to explain to me you were doing on my ship? Luffy asked in a dangerous tone, getting the woman's attention. What are you doing here, Ms. All Sunday? Vivi asked. You know who she is? Nami asked while looking over to Vivi. Who is her partner? She asked again. Her partner is Mr. Zero, the boss, Vivi said, surprising everyone. Crocodile is her partner, Nami yelled out in fear. She was the only one who knew the boss's identity, and that's how we found out, by following her back to him, Vivi said as she looked at the woman with eyes of hatred. To be clear, I allowed you to follow me, she replied. You still haven't answered my question, Luffy said, getting her attention as Sanji pointed a gun to her head while Usopp pointed his slingshot. I would really appreciate it if you stopped pointing those at me, she said before both Sanji and Usopp were thrown off of the second deck by some invisible force and down to the main deck. You know you are playing a dangerous game attacking a member of my crew like that, Luffy said as the sky above began to darken. There is no need to get all excited, I have no real orders here. So, I have no real reason to fight you, she said while looking down at Luffy. All of a sudden something hit Luffy's straw hat off of his head and sent it floating towards the woman who caught it and started spinning at her hand. So you are the famous Monkey D. Luffy, she said. As she finished speaking, a loud thunderclap sound overhead startling everyone and lightning started striking random parts of the water. Every member of Luffy's crew took a step away from him because they all knew no one is allowed to touch Luffy's hat. You know, I don't know if I should be honored, Luffy said before he started to bring his right up and placed his straw hat back on his head, causing everyone's eyes to widen shock and awe. Ms. All Sunday looked at her hand that was spinning the hat and her index finger just there pointing up. He looked back at Luffy now wearing his straw hat with a small amount of fear in her eyes. I didn't even see him move, she thought. We're scared that someone as famous as you know my name, Luffy said, causing her to flinch slightly, something that Luffy didn't miss. Now Ms. All Sunday, if you ever touch my hat again, I will finish what the world government started all those years ago, Luffy said in a dangerous tone, scaring her. Two things was clear in her mind: one, she needed to get off of this ship quickly, and two, Luffy was very dangerous. She then tossed something towards Luffy, who caught it, and upon seeing what it was he looked at her with a puzzled look. The next island is Little Garden. Using that eternal pose you can skip right past it and head to Alabasta, she said with a smile, trying to mask fear. Or else you won't survive Little Garden, she added grimly, trying to scare them. However, she was surprised when Luffy crushed the eternal pose and his hand smiled at her. I am the captain of this and I decide where we go, he said in his usual monotone voice. Ms. All Sunday then got up and started walking to the edge of the ship. Well then, I hope that we meet again, she said as she was leaving. I'm sure we will, Miss Devil, Luffy said, causing her to flinch again. And tell Crocodile I'll be seeing him shortly, Luffy said. She didn't reply. Instead he hopped off of the ship and landed on a giant turtle. Luffy then looked towards Nami and spoke. Plot a course to Little Garden, Luffy said before walking towards the kitchen. Aye, Nami replied before she started giving out orders. Luffy and the crew were sailing in the Grand Line for about a day now since they left Whiskey Peak. They were sailing in calm waters for the majority of the journey, but they had not traveled as far as they would like. The reason for that being that the wind kept stopping every now and then, delaying their journey. Luffy was currently sitting on his throne sipping a glass of whiskey while watching everyone move about the ship. Sanji, Usopp, and Yosaku were fishing off the side of the ship. Zoro was sleeping right next to them. Nami and Vivi were standing on the upper deck in front of Luffy watching them fish. Johnny was up in the crow's nest looking out for any island or any ship heading their way. Nijiko was behind Luffy practicing wielding her 3-section staff. And Vivi's duck Karoo was standing off to Luffy's right looking out into the water. Luffy never thought he would admit this, but he really liked that duck. He was fun to have around. While Luffy was watching everyone go about their duties, the wind suddenly stopped again, causing the sails to drop and the ship itself to stop. Luffy sighed as he felt the ship. When we get to Water 7, I really need to get a ship with paddles or a propeller under the ship, cause this is ridiculous. Luffy thought before turning his attention to Nami and Vivi, who were walking towards him. Luffy, Nami said, getting his attention on her. The wind stopped again, she said, causing Luffy to look at her funny. There is nothing I can do about the wind, Luffy said before he took a sip of his drink. But if we continue at this rate, I am that by the time we reach Alabasta it would be too late, Vivi said with a frown. Luffy got up from his throne and placed his hand on her shoulder, causing her to look up at him. You are worrying too much, everything is going to be okay, he said with a warm smile on his face before he turned towards Nami. Why don't you help her take her mind off things by teaching her some hockey, Luffy said to Nami. Vivi heard that and took on a puzzled look, wondering just what hockey was. When she looked over to Nami, she saw an evil look on Nami's face, causing her to sweat a little. Before she could react, she was being pulled away by Nami, leading her towards the women's quarters. Luffy chuckled when he saw Nami pull Vivi away before he went and sat back down on his throne. As he sat down on his throne, he gave it a mental command to turn around so he could see what Nijiko was doing. When the throne spun around, he saw her sweating and breathing heavily while going through different movements at an impressive rate of speed. She is training really hard, Luffy thought to himself as he watches her strike an invisible opponent with his staff. What brought on this intensity? Luffy asked, getting her attention. Once she heard Luffy's voice, she stopped what she was doing and took a few seconds to catch her breath before she replied. What are you talking about? She asked while breathing heavily. Luffy smiled before he pulled out a second glass and poured some whiskey before handing it to her. Why are you suddenly training so hard? Luffy asked as he watches her down the whiskey in one go. I have always been like this, she said before she handed the glass back to Luffy, who took it and refilled it before handing it back to her. No, you haven't, Luffy said as he got up from his throne and walked over to the back and looked out into the ocean before he continued speaking. Since we left Whiskey Peak, you have been training yourself nonstop. Why? He asked while continuing to look at the water. Nijiko tightens the grip on her 3-section staff before she replied. Because I could have easily died on Whiskey Peak if it wasn't for you, Nami, Zoro, Johnny, and Yosaku, she said, causing Luffy to understand what was going on, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he let her continue. And those guys who were on Whiskey were nothing but cannon fodder compared to the enemies we are going to be facing soon. I let my guard down so easily against a bunch of weaklings and had to be saved by my little sister. Again, she said sadly. Luffy then turned around and placed his hand on her shoulder before he spoke. Hey, you're not alone in this. You weren't the only one who let their guards down back there, and Nami didn't really do much, Luffy said, causing her to look up at him with some tears in her eyes. She didn't fight nobody, all she did was look around for stuff to steal. Well, they didn't really have anything to steal, but that is beside the point. The point is you made a mistake in judgment and you learned from it. There is no need to beat yourself up so much over it after all. This life is new to you. I've been a pirate all my life. Nami been a thief since she was a child, and Zoro and those two have been bounty hunters a long time as well. We have been at this a while and we developed the skills necessary to survive over time, and you will too, Luffy said, trying to get her to relax a bit. Nijiko then wiped a stray tear away from her eyes before he smiled and replied to Luffy. Thanks, Luff, she said with a smile, causing Luffy to smile as well. Good, now show me what you got, Luffy said before he took off his captain's coat and threw it on his throne. Nijiko looked at him puzzled for a second before she spoke. What do you mean? She asked as she watches as Luffy move a few feet away from her. You don't want to die when you face stronger enemies, and you don't want to be protected by your little sister anymore. Instead, you want to protect her. So, you have been training yourself to the ground since we left Whiskey Peak, and now I want to see the fruits of all this training, Luffy said as he took up a defensive stance. Nijiko had her eyes widen at what Luffy just said. He had hit the nail on the head about the way she was feeling, and now he wanted to fight her. Be you, but there is no way I can beat you, Nijiko said in a nervous voice. Luffy chuckled a bit before he replied. I never said for you to be me. I said show me the fruits of your training, he said before motioning her to come at him. Fine then, she said as she took a few seconds to calm her nerves before she took a few steps towards Luffy and started spinning her 3-section staff. Then faster than a normal human eye could track, she launched an attack aimed at Luffy's head, which Luffy easily caught with his hand. Tisk tisk, with attacks like that Nami may still need to protect you, Luffy said while shaking his head, causing Nijiko to growl as she pulled the section of her staff away from Luffy. She then begins to spin all 3 sections of her staff once again before she thrusts it forward aiming at Luffy's chest. Luffy saw the attack coming and simply raised his right hand and stopped it with his palm. "Yeah, you surely are going to die against stronger enemies," Luffy said, pissing her off even more. "Shut up," she screamed as he pulled the staff back and swung it towards Luffy's head, which is easily dodged. "With attacks like these makes me think you want to die," Luffy said as he continued to dodge and block her attacks. "Do you want to die, Nezuko?" Luffy asked a bit louder. "No," she said as continued to attack. "I couldn't hear that. Do you want to die?" Luffy asked again, causing her to growl. "No," she yelled as her attacks got faster and stronger, causing Luffy smile. "Then strike me down," Luffy yelled, causing a determined and angry look to come across her face before gathered her all willpower into her staff and swung it with all her might, aiming for Luffy's right side. Luffy saw it coming and brought his arm up to block it. As the staff hit Luffy's arm, his eyes widened as he suddenly felt pain in the area where he got hit. He quickly looked at the staff and saw a tiny amount of black fading away from the silver staff. Upon seeing that, he smiled and looked over to Nezuko. "Congratulations," Luffy said, confusing her. "You have unlocked your armament haki," he said before walking over to his throne and putting his coat back on. Nezuko stared at Luffy as he put his coat back on with eyes the sis for a few seconds before she stuttered out a question. "What?" she asked in a confused voice. Luffy sat back down on his throne and chuckled at her before he spoke. "It is as I just said," he said as he pulled out his glass and began to pour himself a drink. "That final attack of yours had armament haki in it. That is why I felt pain when it hit me," Luffy said before he took a sip of his drink. Nezuko blinks a few times trying to process what Luffy had just said before she spoke. "But what was it that I did that caused it to awaken?" she asked as she took a seat on the ground in front of Luffy, wanting to hear what he had to say. "It was your willpower," he replied, causing her to look at him in confusion but said nothing. Instead, she waited for him to continue. "If you remember from my explanation of what haki was, I explained that in the case of armament haki, a person's willpower or spirit allows them to create armor around themselves. Just now, even though you weren't in any immediate danger, your will to live and your will to prove yourself to be stronger than your sister was strong enough that you unconsciously covered the lower section of your staff with armament haki," Luffy said before taking another sip of his drink and looking over to Nezuko to see if she understood everything he just said. "So it was just my will?" she asked in a voice of disbelief. "Yeah, I know it sounds hard to believe that the will of a person would have that kind of power, but it is," he said while looking at her with a smile. "You're the first one on the crew to awaken it. Congratulations," he said, causing her to blush slightly at the praise she was getting from her captain. "So what do I do now?" she asked, trying to change the subject. "Well, you need to learn how to summon it at will to point where it would almost become second nature," he said in a serious voice, causing her to look at him with a determined look on her face. "In order to do that, you need to find a way to recapture that feeling you had just before you attacked me and find a way to make it work for you," he said, causing her nod her head at him. "I'll get started right away," she said as she begins to get up in order to continue her training. As she was about to turn and go back to her training, Luffy spoke, causing her to stop. "Before you do that," Luffy said, getting her attention back on him. He then reached into his coat and pulled out a blindfold and tossed it to her before he spoke again. "All that training that you were doing with your staff before I interrupted you, I want you to do all that over again, this time blindfolded," he said, causing her eyes to widen. "But why?" she asked, not really seeing the point of doing something like that. Her control over her staff was already perfect and didn't see how that was going to help her. "Two reasons why actually. Firstly, if you are able to control your weapon with the same efficiency and skill while blindfolded as compared to when your vision is intact, it is only then you can truly say you have mastered it. And lastly, it is quite normal for your enemies to try and take away one of your 5 senses. Oftentimes they seek to take away your ability to see. This will you if you are ever in a position like that," he said before he took another sip of his drink. "I understand," Nezuko said, finding logic in Luffy's words before she walked back to her training spot and placed the blindfold around her eye and began practicing her with staff again. The first few times of her spinning the staff and twirling it around her body resulted in her hitting herself in the leg, head, and chest, causing Luffy to chuckle before turning his throne around in order to see what everyone else was up to. He saw Usopp and the guys had finished catching fish and Sanji was now in the kitchen cook the fish they catch. Zoro was still sleeping. Johnny was still in the crow's nest looking out, and Luffy could hear Vivi's screams as Nami taught her observation haki. It was then Sanji came out and announced that lunch was ready. "Lunch is ready," he yelled, causing everyone to stop what they were doing and began walking towards the kitchen. "Thank God, I'm starving," Johnny said as he climbed down from the crow's nest. Luffy got up from his throne and sent it up in the sky where it was safe before he made his way towards the kitchen. When he walked into the kitchen, he walked straight over to the table and took the open seat in between Vivi and Nezuko. As everyone sat down, Sanji served everyone their food while flirting with the girls. Luffy poured himself some whiskey before he began to eat. "Nami, how much longer till we reach Little Garden?" Zoro asked as he took a bit of his food. "I don't know," she said, causing everyone except Luffy to stop and look at her with wide eyes. "What?" Usopp screamed. How could you not know? You're the navigator, aren't you? He yelled, causing Nami to growl and was about to yell at Usopp, but Luffy spoke before she could. Calm down, Usopp, Luffy said in a calm voice. It is uncharted waters, so there is no exact way of know when we will get there, he said, coming to Nami's defense. Oh, sorry, Usopp said sheepishly while scratching the back of his head. Nami just huffed and went back to her food. Oh, and Nami, Luffy said, getting her attention. The ship needs to be cleaned, he said, causing her to look at him puzzled, wondering why she needs to clean the ship. Why'd I have to do it? She whined. Oh sweet Nami, did you forget about your punishment? Luffy said with an evil smile, causing a look of recognition to flash across Nami's face before she sunk into her seat and replied. No, she said dejectedly, causing everyone else to chuckle while Vivi looked around confused. Don't worry Vivi, I'll tell you later, Nezuko said, causing her to nod. I can't wait to get to Little Garden, Usopp said in a happy voice. I can just see it now, the women of Little Garden all lining up to meet the great Captain Usopp, he proclaimed with his fork in the air. Yeah right, if anything they will all be lined up to meet me, Sanji yelled at Usopp. I don't want to burst your bubbles, Luffy said in a calm voice, getting their attention. But there aren't any people on Little Garden, he said, surprising everyone. What? Sanji and Usopp yelled. No people, that what's on the island, they asked simultaneously. From what I've heard, it is a prehistoric island that is still stuck in the dinosaur age, he said calmly as though it was nothing. Everyone stared at Luffy as though he had grown a second head. Usopp, Yosaku, Nami, and Vivi had gone white as a sheet. The food that Sanji was about to put in his mouth fell to the ground. Nezuko and Johnny were frozen stiff, while Zoro and Karoo just continued eating. Why, you are kidding, right? Usopp asked in a scared voice. Luffy finished eating and downed his whiskey before he replied. Nope, totally serious, he said as he got up and took his plate to the sink. But how is that possible? Nami stuttered out. Yeah, dinosaurs are extinct, Johnny added. Luffy chuckled as he leaned against the wall before he replied. Welcome to the Grand Line, he said with a wide smile. How can you be so calm? Vivi yelled at Luffy, causing him to chuckle some more before he replied. You need to relax, princess, he said coolly. We will keep you safe, so calm down, he said. Yeah, stick with me Vivi, your knight in shining armor will protect you, Sanji yelled with hearts in his eyes, causing everyone to sweat drop. Anyway, Luffy said seriously, getting everyone's attention. When we get there I want Zoro and Sanji to restock our meat supplies, Luffy said, causing the two of them to nod their heads in apprehension. Aye Captain, they said simultaneously. Good, and now for the most important thing of them all, he said, causing everyone to lean towards him a bit. Under no circumstances are any of you allowed to touch any of the plants, insects, berries or fruits of any kind while we are on that island, understood? He asked, causing everyone of th. But why all of that, big bro Luffy? Johnny asked, wondering why they couldn't touch any of those things. Because if you get infected by something on that island, the cure for it probably doesn't or no longer exists, Luffy yelled, scaring all of them. Do I make myself clear? He asked, causing all of them to nod their heads quickly. Good, now Nami hurry up and eat and get cleaning, he said before he walked out of the kitchen. Time skip. 2 days later. I see an island, Yosaku yelled from the crow's nest, getting everyone's attention. He had decided to take the lookout duties today in order for Johnny to relax a bit. Luffy was sitting on his throne, yelled out orders for Nami when he saw the island Yosaku was pointing to. Nami, he said, getting her attention. You're in charge from here. Take us in, he said, causing her to smile before she looked at her log pose and then looked at the crew. There is no mistake, Cactus Island and this one are definitely pulling against each other, she said before pointing to the island. It's our next stop, she yelled, causing Usopp, Johnny, and Vivi's duck Karoo to start dancing and cheering. As the ship sailed closer and closer to the island, the cheering stopped and turned into scared pleas to turn around. What the hell is little about this place? Usopp yelled while sweating slightly. Luffy decided to get up and go stand with Nami as they approached the island. As he was walking, he gave a mental command to his throne to return to the sky before he spoke to Usopp. Usopp, are you forgetting what lives on that island? Luffy asked as he walked and stood next to Nami. Usopp thought about it for a second before he turned to look at Nami and Luffy, white as a sheet while trembling slightly. See, can we just skip this island? He stuttered out. I'm sure we can make it to the next island without going to shore on this one, he yelled. Luffy decided not to answer him. Instead, he let Nami answer with his complaints. The only way to reset the log is to go ashore, Nami said with a sigh while placing her hands on her hips. Besides, we need to restock our food supplies, Sanji added as he lit a cigarette. We didn't get so much as a sack of flour in the last town, he said as he blew out some smoke. Guys, Zoro said, getting all of their attention. There's our ticket in, he said while pointing forward to the island. Everyone looked to see where he was pointing and saw a small river going into the island. Nezuko ran inside and took control of the rudder, and with help of Nami guidance she managed to take the ship in through the small river. As they were sailing on the river, they all noticed the vast jungle on both sides while the air was filled with the sound of different animals and birds. Nami looked at her log pose and back at jungle before she spoke. "I don't know," she said, causing Luffy to look at her with a raised eyebrow. "Usopp may be right on this one," she said, causing Usopp to look at her with hopeful eyes. "We can wrest the log from the ship. We don't need to go ashore, and once it resets we can leave and never look back," said Nami in a slightly scared voice. "Right," Usopp and Karoo said while giving a salute. "Hate to burst your bubbles, but we have no idea how long it will take for it to reset," Luffy said as he began walking down the stairs. "There are some islands where the log pose only takes a few minutes, then there are islands where it takes a few years," he said, causing all of their eyes to widen. "A few years?" Usopp said as he dropped to his knees. "We are going to die," he cried out to the heavens. "Calm down, Usopp," Luffy said, trying to get his sniper under control. "We don't know for sure, so calm down," he said before walking off to the side and looked out into the jungle. As he was staring out into the jungle, a large tiger emerges from the bushes and began stacking the ship while staring at Luffy, who just stared right back with his usually emotionless face. "I have never seen a tiger that big," Johnny commented while grabbing his Basento just in case. "Neither have I," said Vivi as she walked and stood behind a very scared Karoo. As everyone was staring at the tiger as it walked beside the ship, it suddenly stopped and its eyes widened before he suddenly coughed up some blood and dropped to the floor dead. Even Luffy was surprised by what he just saw. "What could have killed a giant tiger like that?" asked a very scared Nejico. "I have no idea," Luffy replied, worrying the crew even more. "Alright, this is far enough," Luffy said before he turned around and looked at everyone. "Johnny, Yosaku dropped the anchor," Luffy said, causing the two of them to give a salute before they ran to the front of the ship and dropped the anchor. "We dropped her, Captain," they yelled, causing Luffy to nod his head before he turned towards Sanji and spoke. "Sanji, could you make me some lunch? I want to get my energy up," Luffy said, causing Sanji to nod and walk off to the kitchen. "Get your energy up for what exactly?" Nami asked as she stood next to Nejico and Vivi, who all had their hands on their hips staring at Luffy while tapping their foot. Luffy would never admit it, but the way those three were looking at him was making him a bit nervous. "I want to go explore the island, so I want to get my energy up just in case I got to wrestle a T-Rex," Luffy said nonchalantly. "Say, Luffy," Vivi said, getting his attention. "Would it be okay if I come along with you?" she asked while looking out into the jungle. When everyone heard her ask that, they all stared at her with wide eyes. "What?" Nami screamed while staring at Vivi. "Vivi, you can't be serious," she yelled. Vivi just smiles at Nami before she replied. "Well, yeah, I don't want to stay here with nothing to do other than worry about my troubles," she said happily, causing Luffy to smile. "You know, for a princess you're alright," Luffy said as he leaned against the rails of the ship. "It is official, Luffy has corrupted her," Usopp said while shaking his head when out of nowhere a bolt of lightning came down from the sky and struck Usopp, causing him to fall over on the floor, burnt to a crisp. Everyone looked at Luffy only to see him whistling innocently as we began walking towards the kitchen. After lunch, Luffy and Vivi, who was riding on Karoo's back, set out to explore the new island of Luffy Garden. As they were running through the jungle for some time now, they suddenly stopped when the ground beneath their feet shook as though they were having an earthquake. When they looked up, they saw a herd of Brachiosaurus eating the leaves from the really tall trees. All of a sudden the ground shook once more before one of the Brachiosaur's head came flying off, causing both Vivi and Luffy's eyes to widen. "What could have killed a beast that big?" asked Vivi. "Now what? Who?" Luffy said, causing her to look at him as though he had grown a second head. "Look at the wound, it is a clean cut. If an animal did kill it, then there would be bite marks," he said, causing her to understand. Luffy then turned his attention back to the downed beast and saw a giant figure stand over it. "Gegya," the figure said before bending down to Luffy and Vivi's level, scaring Vivi and putting Luffy on guard. "I am the greatest warrior of all of Elbaf. I am Dory." "Gegya," the giant named Dory said, jolly, causing Luffy to drop his guard slightly. "It's a giant," Vivi said in disbelief as she stared up at Dory. "I've heard they exist, but I've never seen one before," she said. "I'm Luffy and I'm a pirate. Nice to meet you," Luffy replied to the giant. "Gegya, a pirate? Well, good for you, young man," Dory said while laughing. "And this is Vivi and Karoo," Luffy said while pointing over to the two of them, causing them to stiffen slightly. "Gegya, tell you what, you are all invited over to my home for lunch," Dory said, scaring Vivi even more. She was about to decline, but Luffy spoke before she had a chance to. "We would be honored," he said, causing Vivi to fall to her knees and started questioning a good idea to come with Luffy. "Wonderful. Gegya, Dory said before placing his very large hand down in front of them. "Hop on," he said, causing Luffy to nod and step on his hand before looking over his shoulder looking for Vivi, only to see her and Karoo slowly crawling onto the hand. The giant began walking towards a giant-sized rock with really big holes in, while carrying the three of them in his right hand and the headless dinosaur in his other hand. When they got to the rock, Dory sat the three of them down before he started to make a fire and cut up the dinosaur. Luffy decides to help him out in order to speed things along. Spoke up. Dory, Luffy said loudly for him to hear. Why don't you let me get the fire started while you prepare the meat? He said as he walked over to the large pile of wood. Gegya, how kind of you, he said in a joyful voice before stepping aside and getting Luffy to start the fire. It is the least I can do after all you are treating us to lunch, he said before he pointed his right index finger at the firewood, causing a small bolt of lightning to fire out and ignite a small part of the wood. Luffy repeated the process about 5 times on 5 different pieces of wood, causing them to ignite as well. After about 2 minutes the fire started to pick up, causing Luffy to nod in satisfaction before he walked back over to Vivi and sat down on the log with her. After Dory finished cutting up the meat, he placed it on the fire to cook before he took a seat in front of the giant rock and began conversing with Luffy and Vivi. Say, Mr. Dory, Vivi said politely, getting the giant's attention. How long does it take for the log to reset on this island? She asked, causing Luffy to look up at Dory, wanting to know the answer as well. 1 full year, he said with a smile, causing Luffy's eyes to widen and Vivi to pass out. 1 year? Luffy asked, causing Dory to nod his head before he replied. Yes, most people never survive that 1 year, he said, causing Luffy to raise his eyebrow. They usually succumb to the elements or get eaten by an animal, he said before he turned the meat over on the fire. Luffy then sighed and rubbed his forehead and began to think.
He needed to get Vivi back to Alabasta in time to stop the war, or else he wouldn't get to make Alabasta his territory, and he had no intention of waiting a whole year for that. If he waits a whole year, there might not be a country left for him make his territory. He could risk the possibility of flying to Alabasta himself and buying an eternal pose there and come back and grab the rest of the crew, but he doesn't know how long it would take for him to find Alabasta.
This just turned into one big headache, Luffy said with a sigh as he started massaging his temple. Just then Dory took the meat off of the fire and placed a large piece of the dinosaur in front of the two of them. Eat up, my friends, he said before he picks up another piece from the fire and bit into it. Luffy walked around the log and shook Vivi awake. He then pulled out his sword and carved out 2 pieces for her and Karoo before he carved out 1 for himself. Vivi took the piece from Luffy before looking up at him with tears in her eyes. Luffy smiled at her as he places his hand on her shoulder before he spoke. Don't worry, he said in a calm voice. I said I was going to get you home and stop the war, and I will, he said, causing her to smile slightly before she nodded to him. Luffy then sat down before her and took a bite of his meat. Dory, he said, getting the giant's attention. I don't mean to pry, but why do you live out here by yourself? Don't you have a village to call home? Luffy asked, causing Dory to smile before he replied. I came from a village, a home of many warriors called Elbaf, he said while looking down at Luffy. It once was home, but I no longer call it that, he said, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow at that. Why? He asked curiously as to why he would leave the home of the giants. There are certain rules in Elbaf which must be obeyed, he said, allowing Luffy to understand. For example, when a fight breaks out and neither side yields, judgment is handed out by Elbaf's god. Whoever he deems to be righteous will be declared the winner and is granted survival as well as divine protection, he said before he picked up his meat and took another bite. This place is out battleground. We have fought for a century and Elbaf has yet to choose a champion, Gegya, he said, causing Luffy and Vivi's eyes to widen for 2 different reasons. Even with all the time in the world, wouldn't your desires wane after 100 years of the same battle? Vivi said as she stood up. At this point, is there any real animosity left between you two, or are you just fighting to fight? She asked, causing Dory to laugh and Luffy to chuckle. She really is a pacifist, he thought to himself. Suddenly one of the volcanoes off to the left of the rock erupted, causing everyone to look over at that. That's some exposition, Luffy said as he took a bite of his meat and stared at the volcano. Well then, it's time to get going, Dory said before he got up from his sitting position, causing Luffy and Vivi to look over at him in confusion. It was then Luffy noticed something about Dory. His whole demeanor changed. His eyes became cold, his smile was gone, and his posture was that of a warrior getting ready for war. The volcano then erupted a second time before Dory spoke. Please forgive me, but there is something I must attend to, he said as he picked up his shield and sword. That's the signal my opponent uses to mark the beginning of our fight, he said, causing Luffy to nod his head in understanding. As for why we are fighting, we do not remember, Gegya, he said. It's senseless. How can you have so much hatred for someone that you could fight them for an entire century? She asked while looking up at the towering giant. What could have happened to make you this mad? She asked, causing Luffy to interrupt her. Vivi, that's enough, he said while placing his hand in front of her face, stopping her. This isn't what this is about, okay? He said as he felt the ground starting to shake. You're right. This is about honor, Dory said as he narrowed his eyes at his approaching opponent before he took off towards him. Luffy and Vivi looked on as the 2 giants clashed with 2 different reactions. Luffy was watching in awe at the scale of the battle taking place before them, while Vivi was disgusted at the fact that these 2 were fighting for no reason whatsoever. As the fight progressed, Luffy and Vivi were completely absorbed in the spectacle taking place before them when suddenly Luffy's observation haki alerted him of a presence some distance away to the left. He narrowed his eyes and turned his slightly before looking over, making sure he was noticed by whoever was there. When he looked over, he saw a woman floating on an umbrella in the sky some distance away. Luffy immediately recognized her as Miss Valentine, and if she was here, that meant Mr. Five was here as well. He didn't tell Vivi about it. Instead, his guard was placed all the way up and his observation haki was running at max. Luffy then noticed her descending back to the ground before she was hidden from his view by the bushes. Deciding to see what was going on, he tried to sense where she was, who she is with, and where she was going. He sensed her presence along with another familiar presence who he chalked up to be Mr. Five. The two of them were walking away from Luffy and Vivi and heading in the opposite direction. Luffy then tried to find where his crew was. Sanji was by himself, Johnny and Yosaku were together, Zoro was also by himself, and Nami, Usopp, and Nejico were together. He let out a sigh of relief knowing they're all okay before he turned back to the fight, only to see both Dory and his opponent falling down to the ground before they started laughing with each other. Dory and his opponent then got up and his opponent handed him something before TTE ways. Dory came back over and sat down with some barrels in his hand. Brogy said he has guests over and they gave him these wonderful refreshments. He was kind of enough to share them with me, he said as he sat down. Did he say who his guests were? Luffy asked, wanting to know if the giant named Brogy was with his crew or Baroque Works. He didn't say, but from what I could see there were two young ladies and a fellow with a long nose, he said, causing Luffy to chuckle. They are from my crew, he said with a smile. Gegyagyagya, then I should be thanking you for this lovely refreshments. Oh well, he said as he held up two barrels between his fingers before he broke the tops in with his thumb and began drinking. While he was drinking the alcohol, Luffy noticed the look on his face suddenly change. Before Luffy could think about it, the alcohol exploded, causing Dory's eyes to roll back into his head and he collapsed on his back. Dory, Luffy and Vivi yelled as both of them sprang to their feet. That is the same alcohol that was on the ship, Luffy said while staring at the down Dory with wide eyes. That other giant must have booby-trapped it, Vivi said, causing Luffy to look over at her with a cold look on his face. Shut up, Vivi, Luffy said lowly. There is no way he would do that. There is too much pride involved here for him to pull a low move like that, Luffy said. Alright then, who did do it? She asked. Before Luffy could reply, Dory spoke as he got up slowly with his weapon in hand. You strangers, Dory said lowly as he stuck his giant word in the ground. It wasn't Brogy, no way. No warrior of Elbaf would dare. So, who else to suspect on this island then? Besides you, he said, causing Luffy to step in front of Vivi with his eyes narrowed. My crew and I aren't the only ones here on this island, Luffy said, surprising everyone. And just who else is on this island? Dory asked in a dangerous tone. A group of bounty hunters, he said while looking up at the towering giant. If I am not mistaken, you are Dory the Blue Ogre, and this friend of yours is Brogy the Red Ogre, former captains of the giant warrior pirates. Luffy said, surprising Vivi. The two of you have a 200 million berry bounty on your head, correct? He asked, causing Dory to nod, all the while looking at Luffy with suspicion. Why don't you let me and my crew take care of them while you focus on your fight with Brogy? Luffy offered. And why should I trust you? Dory asked while towering over Luffy. And how exactly do you know they're on this island? He asked again. You're from the New World. I'm sure you know about hockey, Luffy said, remembering that Elbaf was in the New World, one of the many things taught to him by Shanks' right-hand man, Ben Beckman. I do know of hockey, however, I am not a practitioner of it, he said, causing Luffy to nod his head understanding. Luffy assumed that he probably thought of hockey as a form of cheating in a duel. I assure you, Dory, whoever interrupted his scared duel will pay for it, he said in a cold voice as the skies above started to darken and be filled with thunderclouds. Right then and there the volcano erupted, signaling it is time for the next fight. Luffy looked over at Dory and spoke. I take it you are still going to fight in your condition, he said as he stared at Dory. I must, as an Elbaf warrior, he said before he coughed up some blood, causing Luffy to become even more pissed off. What? Vivi yelled out in surprise. Dory, you need rest, Vivi yelled out, trying to reason with the giant. I am Dory and I will fight for Elbaf's pride and die as a warrior, he said as he began taking slow steps towards his battlegrounds. While Dory was walking towards his duel, the skies continued to darken while Luffy stood there in place with a pissed off look on his face. As Dory and Brogy began their duel, Usopp suddenly crash-landed in front of Luffy and Vivi. Usopp, Luffy said in surprise. Usopp sprang to his feet and started crying in front of Luffy. Luffy, Nami and Nejico were eaten by a dinosaur, yelled in a panic, causing Vivi, Luffy, and Karu's eyes to widen. What? They three of them yelled. We were being chased through the jungle and I was running in front of them, and when I looked back they were suddenly gone, he cried out while hugging the giant duck. Luffy, not wanting to take Usopp's word for it, began trying to sense Nami and Nejico, and much to his relief he found them. Relax, Usopp, they're alive, Luffy said, causing him to let out a sigh of relief. Vivi then started to explain to Usopp that Baroque Works is here on the island and had tampered with Dory's drink. Just as Usopp was about to speak, they all noticed Dory beginning to fall down while Brogy was going for the finishing blow. Everyone's eye widens as they saw a tower of blood squirt out from Dory's wound as Brogy cut him across the chest. "Dory!" they all yelled out. Before they can say anything else, two figures emerge from the bushes off to the right of the group. "What a shame," said Mr. Five as he and Miss Valentine made themselves known. Vivi and Usopp were scared when they saw the two of them, and Luffy to growl when he saw them for two reasons. First, for what they did to Dory, and second, for letting his guard down again. He was caught off guard by Dory dying, he dropped his guard, and now these two insects managed to sneak up on him. After 100 years their duel finally ends. So dishonorably, Mr. Five said, pissing Luffy off even more. Luffy then looked to Vivi and Usopp before he spoke. "Nami and Negico are in that direction and they seem to be alone," he said while pointing just off to the right of Brogy. "Go find them and wait for me there," he said before he turned back to the duo. "I'll take care of these two," he said lowly as thunder boomed overhead and lightning flashed. Vivi then hopped on Karu's back before the three of them took off running in the direction of Nami and Negico. As they were running away, Ms. Valentine spoke. "Kya ha ha ha. I don't know who told you kiddies you could leave," she said before he jumped really high in the air and floated over the retreating group. Just as she was right over the group getting ready to drop down on them, Luffy suddenly appeared in front of her. "And I don't recall ever tell you to move," he said in a cold voice, causing her eyes to widen before she was kicked back down to the ground at amazing speed. However, when she landed on the ground it didn't seem as though she got much damage from the fall, only from Luffy's kick. That intrigued Luffy. He knew she had devil fruit powers but was curious as to what devil fruits. "How interesting," Luffy said as he landed back on the ground and began walking towards the duo. "I had expected you land a lot harder than that," he said while staring at Ms. Valentine, who was now holding her side in pain from where Luffy kicked her. "I ate the kilo fruit. I can change my body weight at my will," she said, causing Luffy to finally understand. "I see, so when I just kicked you your body weight was at 0 or something, which allowed you to take minimum damage from that fall," he said as he continued to walk towards the duo. "A devil fruit like that could come in handy," Luffy observed while staring at the girl. "Enough chit-chat," Mr. Five yelled, causing Luffy to look over to him. "I think it's time we got down to business. I've been meaning to pay you back for what you did at Whiskey Peak," he said with a growl. "And I will pay you back for what you did to Dory, because if I am not mistaken you ate the bomb fruit. So you were the one who planted that bomb," Luffy said in a cold voice. "That's right, now prepare to face my bomb fruit," Mr. Five yelled as he charged towards Luffy. Luffy just stared at him with his cold, emotionless eyes before he spoke in a low voice. "Fools like you who cling to their devil fruits could never beat me," he said before he dodged Mr. Five punch to the face and then proceeded to give him a hockey-infused knee to the stomach. Mr. Five then hunched over on the ground and before he even had a chance to recover, Luffy pivoted on his left leg and delivered a spinning heel kick right to Mr. Five's face, sending him tumbling back to Ms. Valentine. "Mr. Five!" Ms. Valentine yelled as she watches her partner lay face down on the ground bleeding from his mouth. After a few minutes, Mr. Five then began to get back up. As he stood up he looked at Luffy and reached into his pocket and pulled out a gun. Luffy, not really being worried about a gun, just stared at him with the same emotionless look on his face. Mr. then opened the revolver's chamber and blew into it before he closed it and aimed it at Luffy, confusing him. "Die!" Mr. Five yelled as he fired 6 times at Luffy. Luffy could sense something coming towards him but couldn't see it. Although he could sense it, he still didn't dodge. Instead, he let all 6 shots hit him. As the 6 shots impacted Luffy's chest, they exploded on contact, hiding Luffy from the view of the duo in a thick cloud of black smoke. "Kya ha ha ha. That ought to teach him," Ms. Valentine said smugly. "Teach me what exactly?" came Luffy's voice from inside the cloud of smoke. When the smoke cleared they all saw Luffy standing there, missing the entire right side of his chest, including his right arm, along with a small part of the right side of his face. "Just what are you?" Mr. Five asked in slight fear as he took a step back. "I'm a lightning man," Luffy said before the missing parts of his body started to reform themselves as lightning. When the lightning disappeared, the two of them saw Luffy standing there as though he had never gotten shot. "Now, I think it is time to get serious," Luffy said before he suddenly disappears from their view, causing their eyes to widen. Before Ms. Valentine could react, Luffy appeared behind her and placed the palm of his hand on her back before he spoke. "Bind," he said, causing 5 ropes of lightning to come out of his palm and bind Ms. Valentine in place. "Ah!" she yelled out in surprise before falling over face first. "Sorry, but I don't like fighting girls," Luffy said before he turned his attention to Mr. Five and spoke. "Now for your punishment," he said before disappeared and reappear in front of Mr. Five and delivered a hockey-infused punch to his stomach. Once again Mr. Five found himself hunched over on the ground, coughing up blood. Luffy then grabbed him by the back of his neck and roughly pulled up and with a great show of strength tossed him in the air. "Mr. Five!" Ms. Valentine yelled as she watches from her position on the ground her partner falling from about 30 feet in the air. Luffy ignored the screaming woman and stood right under the falling man. He then covered his fist in hockey and held it up to the sky. Mr. Five landed with his back right on Luffy's extended fist, causing him to scream out in pain. Luffy just held them there in the air for a few seconds before he threw him next to his partner. "Please. I beg. You, please. Stop," the downed Mr. 5 begged. Luffy walked over to him and placed his foot on his back before he spoke. "Bind," he said before 5 ropes of lightning came out and bound him in place just like Ms. Valentine. "Don't even bother trying to use your devil fruits while you're bounded," Luffy said while looking at Ms. Valentine. "It won't work," he said, surprising her. She ignored Luffy and tried using her devil fruit powers and found she couldn't. "What have you done to my devil fruit?" she screamed. "That lightning is infused with something special that negates all devil fruit powers," Luffy replied before he summoned a thundercloud and sat down on it. "Now the two of you are going to tell me why you planted that bomb," Luffy said while looking at the two of them. "We'll tell you. Whatever you want. Just no more fighting," Mr. 5 choked out. "It wasn't our idea," Ms. Valentine said, causing Luffy to look over at her. "It was Mr. 3's idea. He wanted those giants' bounty and he outtranks us," she said, trying to get Luffy spare them. She had just seen how easily he handled Mr. 5 and she knows he can easily kill them both without breaking a sweat. All she wanted was to survive this ordeal. "And who is this Mr. 3? Luffy asked in a bored tone. "We don't know his real name, but he is stronger than Mr. 5 and very devious," she said. She was doing all of the talking because she knew Mr. 5 was too injured and didn't want him to push himself too far. "He ate the wax fruit and can control and produce wax from his body," she said, causing Luffy to nod his head. "And his partner?" he asked, knowing very well that this Mr. 3 had a female companion. "His partner is Ms. Goldenweek. She is a 16 and uses paint to control a person's emotions," she said, causing Luffy to look at her with a raised eyebrow while waiting for her to continue. "It's called Color Trap. She can change a person's personality through the use of certain colors, changing their behavior as she sees fit," she said, causing Luffy's eyes to widen slightly in surprise. "And she didn't eat a devil fruit?" he asked, causing her to shake her head, saying no. "Interesting," he said. Before he could say anything else, he heard some rumbling off to his right and looking over. When he looked over, he saw a giant cake made out of wax with 5 candles spinning at the top. "Well, that's not something you see every day," Luffy said in a bored tone. "That's Mr. 3's doing," Mr. 5 said, letting everyone know he is still alive. "Well, I hope this guy is more fun than you two because I went from being really pissed off to really bored," Luffy said as he got up from the cloud and walked over to the two of them. He then picked the two of them up and threw them onto the cloud. He then began walking towards where all the fun seemed to be happening while the thundercloud followed behind him. After walking for a few minutes, Luffy and the 2 captured agents came onto a sight that made Luffy feel ashamed. Standing trapped in the wax of cake was every member of his crew except Sanji along with Vivi. Karoo was tied up next to a little girl who was drinking tea. Luffy also noticed the down figure of Dory, who he could still sense is alive, and a captured Brogy. "Luffy!" all of them yelled as they saw him walk into the clearing. Luffy looked at all of them with a cold look before he spoke. "What do you want?" he asked in a cold voice, surprising them. "What do you mean? Get us out of here," Nami yelled. "I'll do that when I feel like it," Luffy replied, causing all of their eyes to widen. Luffy then turned his attention to the man with his hair shaped like the number 3. "I take it that you are Mr. 3? Luffy asked while looking at him. "That I am. I see you defeated Mr. 5 and Ms. Valentine," Mr. 3 said as he adjusted his glasses. "But that means very little. As you can see, I have captured your crew and they are about to die," he yelled before he started laughing maniacally. "Oh yes, I see that very well," Luffy said while throwing a cold glance at his crew. "Luffy, just what is your problem?" Nami asked. "We are about to die," she yelled out in frustration. "Yes, the 7 of you are about to be killed because 7 you couldn't handle an old weirdo and a fucking child," Luffy screamed back in anger, causing a loud thunder to boom overhead and lightning to start striking random parts of the island. Everyone stared at Luffy in shock and in some fear. The last time the crew saw Luffy close to being this pissed was when Nami stole the ship and betrayed the crew, but even that couldn't compare to this. "And my so-called vice captain over there wants to be the greatest swordsman in the world, and here he is getting trapped by some weakling," Luffy said before he raised his right hand in the air. "Try and survive this, would you?" he said. "Judgment," he called out as he brought his arm down, causing a large pillar of lightning to descend on the cake made of wax, destroying it. Mr. 3 looked on as his masterpiece was destroyed so effortlessly, and his prisoners were now free from the cake, but they still had the candle lock attached to their legs. He turned toward Luffy and looked at him with pure force charging towards him. "Candle lock!" Mr. 3 yelled while thrusting his hands forward, causing a wave of wax to rush towards Luffy, who didn't move an inch. After the wax surrounded itself around Luffy's feet, it hardens quickly, locking Luffy's foot in place. "Now what are you going to do, Mr. 100 million berries?" Mr. 3 mocked, thinking he had successfully captured Luffy. "Is this it?" Luffy asked in a bored tone, causing the smug smile on Mr. 3's face to vanish and a look of anger spread across it. "What do you mean if this is it?" he asked angrily. "You're trapped and I will not get to add you to my collection along with all the rest of your crew once I capture them again." He yelled at Luffy, who just let out a sigh before covering his entire lower body and lighting, causing the wax around his feet to evaporate. What? How? Mr. 3 asked in disbelief. Lightning is 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun, dumbass, Luffy said as he began walking towards Mr. 3. That's actually true. Surprised me as well. Here, I thought you would actually be a challenge, Luffy said with a sigh while still walking towards Mr. 3. Guess that was just wishful thinking, he said in a bored tone before he disappeared from view and reappeared right next to Mr. before he delivered a lightning speed kick to Mr. 3's face, sending him flying out of the clearing. Ms. Goldenweek had her eyes widen at how easily her partner had been defeated. He beat Mr. 3, Ms. Valentine said in a voice of pure disbelief as she looked on from the cloud. She knew Luffy was strong, but she didn't think he was a match for Mr. 3. She thought that Mr. 3 would push Luffy to his limits before he gave up, but instead, Luffy took care of Mr. 3 without breaking a sweat. It was like a giant stepping on an ant. Well, that takes care of him, Luffy said in a bored tone before turning to his crew. As he turned and looked at them, he saw all of them laying on the ground with their legs bounded, looking up at him. He sighed before he walked over and melted the wax with his lightning before he turned his attention to Ms. Goldenweek and the 2 bounded bounty hunters. Damn it, my shirt got burned off, came Nami's voice, causing Luffy to turn his attention over to her. When he looked over, he saw Nami standing there with her shirt completely gone, leaving only her bra. When I am done with you, your shirt is going to be the least of your worries, Luffy said in a monotone voice, causing all of them to strengthen up slightly before he turned his attention back to the 3 Baroque Works agents. What are we going to do with them, Captain? Zoro asked while looking at the 3 agents. Luffy said nothing. Instead, he walked towards the 3 individuals and spoke. I am going to make the 3 of you an offer, he said, getting their attention. You can either go back to Crocodile and tell him you failed your mission and die, he said, causing their eyes to widen when they heard their boss's identity. Or you can join my crew, he said, causing their eyes to widen further and the jaws to drop. Luffy's crew were slightly surprised, but they couldn't say that they didn't expect something like this to happen. Vivi, on the other hand, was surprised beyond belief. As much as she was surprised, she was just as angry as well. Luffy, you cannot be serious, Vivi yelled while taking a few steps towards Luffy. They tried to kill us and now you are offering them a place on your crew, she yelled out, absolutely livid about that idea. And your point being what exactly? Luffy asked in his usual monotone voice. Before Vivi could reply, Luffy spoke once more. Nami committed treason and she is still part of my crew. Johnny tried to kill me at one point as well and he is a part of my crew. So what point are you trying to make here? Luffy asked, causing Vivi to look at Nami and Johnny, hoping that what Luffy said wasn't true, only see the 2 of them nodding their head. Vivi then looked back to Luffy and was about to try and reason with him again, but before she could speak, Luffy beat her to it again. And need I remind you, princess, you are a passenger on my ship, not a crew member, and you sure as hell ain't the captain, Luffy said somewhat harshly, causing the rest of his crew to look at Vivi in pity, feeling sorry for her. Vivi didn't say anything else. Instead, she turned and walked back and stood with the rest of the crew before trying not to make eye contact with anyone. Don't you think that was a bit too harsh, Luffy? Nijiko asked from her position besides Vivi. Luffy didn't reply to her. Instead, he turned to the group of Baroque Works agents and spoke. Well? Luffy asked, causing the 3 of them to look at each other for a second before they each gave their response. I'll join you, said Ms. Valentine. I prefer to be your ally than being your enemy, Mr. 5 said, causing Luffy to nod before he looked over at Ms. Goldenweek. She took some time and looked around to see if Mr. 3 was going to return, but after realizing that he wasn't, she spoke up. I'll join as well, she said, causing Luffy to smile before he snapped his fingers, causing the lightning that bounded Ms. Valentine and Mr. 5 to disappear, allowing them to move once again. Welcome to the Straw Hat Pirates, Luffy said with a smile, causing them to smile and nod their heads. Luffy then turned to the 2 giants that were off to the side and walked up to them. Sorry I didn't free you right away, Brogy. I want to make sure the threat was gone, Luffy said before he used his lightning to melt the wax, freeing Brogy. It is no problem, my young friend, Brogy said happily before his smile slowly faded away as he looking at the down form of Dory. Luffy, seeing this, decided to give him some good news. Don't worry about Dory, Luffy said, getting his attention. He is still alive, he said, causing everyone's eyes to widen. What? Brogy yelled out in surprise. Dory is alive, but how? He asked while switching between Luffy and Dory. I can only guess that it is because that after dueling for 100 years your weapons have dulled, Luffy said, causing everyone to look over at the 2 giant weapons and saw that they were in pretty bad shape. Of course, not even weapons made in Elbaf could withstand 2 giants dueling for 100 years, Usopp said happily as he was glad Dory was alive. And right on cue, everyone saw Dory was beginning to wake up. After being helped up by Brogy, Dory and everyone else went back to the giant rock that Luffy and Vivi were having lunch with Dory and sat down and relaxed while Dory patched up his wounds. While we are waiting here, can someone please tell me where Sanji is? Luffy asked as he summoned his throne. Before anyone could answer him, they all heard the voice of Sanji coming from behind them. Oh, Nami, Vivi, Nijiko. Did you miss me? Sanji asked with hearts in his eyes, and he skipped towards the crew. When he saw the two giants and the three former Baroque Works agents, he immediately went into a protective stance in front of Nami and Vivi. "Okay, who are you and which one of you is Mr. 3? He yelled, returning to his usual self. "And how exactly do you know about Mr. 3? Nami asked, causing him to turn around and look at her. "Oh Nami, you look so beautiful in that outfit," he yelled as he saw Nami in her bra. "Care to repeat that?" Nami yelled while balling her fist. "Calm down, here have my coat," he said as he took off his coat and handed it to her for her to cover up. "You see, I've been a bit busy," he said as he sat down on a log nearby. "I just got off the phone with Mr. Zero on the transponder snail," he said, causing everyone to look at him with eyes the size of dinner plates. "You what?" everyone yelled. "Yeah, I found this enemy hideout in the middle of the jungle and he called," he said before he lit a cigarette. "I answered and he thought I was some Mr. 3 who he apparently sent here to kill us and Vivi," Sanji said as he blew out some smoke. "I told him that the Vivi and the Straw Hats were all dead," Sanji said happily while everyone looked at him like he'd. "So he thinks he doesn't have to send anyone else after us anymore," Vivi said in a whisper. "So you are saying we are free of people chasing us now that we can't go anywhere?" Usopp cried out. "We can't go? Is there something we still need to take care of here?" Sanji asked, still unaware that the log takes a whole year to reset. "That's a real shame after I managed to get hold of this thing," he said as he pulled out an eternal pose said to Alabasta, causing everyone's jaws to drop. "An eternal pose to Alabasta," Johnny yelled out. "Now we can finally set sail," Yosaku added as they all started dancing. "Now why can't the rest of you be like Sanji?" Luffy said, causing all of them to stop celebrating and started to sulk. "Dory, Brogy, it's been fun, but it is time for us to go now," Luffy said as he got up from his throne and sent it back into the sky. "Right, it is a shame that you have to leave so soon," Dory said while Brogy nodded his head in agreement. "Take care of yourselves," Luffy said as he and his crew began walking back towards the ship. After walking for about 5 minutes, the crew arrived back at the ship and saw 3 large dead dinosaurs in front of the ship. "I take it this is out meat?" Luffy asked while looking at Sanji, causing him to nod his head along with Zoro and the bounty hunting duo. "Yeah, and as you can see mine is clearly bigger than the rest," Sanji said smugly. "No, ours is the biggest," the bounty hunting duo yelled. "As if, mine is clearly the biggest," Zoro yelled, causing Luffy to sigh. "It doesn't matter, we don't need it all anyway," Luffy said as he unsheathed his sword and held it reverse grip in front of his face, causing everyone to look at him to see what he was about to do. "Star counter," Luffy said before he disappears and reappears standing on the side of the ship with his back to everyone, slowly sheathing his sword slowly. Then suddenly a click was echoed throughout the area as the sword was completely sheathed, causing square chunks of meat to fall off the bones of the 3 dinosaurs, leaving behind just the skeleton. Zoro stared at what just happened with wide eyes. Never he had ever seen someone produce that many cuts over such a wide area so fast. "Take meat from all 3 dinosaurs and get ready to set sail," Luffy said before he hopped into the ship and went and stood on the upper deck looking down at everyone hurrying to set sail and packing the meat in the refrigerator. After a few minutes all the meat was stored away. Johnny and Yosaku were on the rudder ready to go. Zoro had just pulled up the anchor. Nami was standing beside Luffy along with the 3 new crew members. Usopp and Sanji were standing by the main mast waiting for Luffy's signal to release the sails, and Nejico and Vivi were at the front of the ship staring out. "Everything is ready, Captain," Zoro yelled as he secured the anchor. "Johnny, you guys are ready?" Luffy asked. "Aye, Captain," they yelled back. "Well then, set sail," Luffy yelled, causing Sanji and Usopp to release the sails, causing the ship to catch the wind and start moving forward. "The giants said if we keep sailing straight would take us to the western end of the island," Nami said, causing Luffy to nod. As the ship sailed further, they started to see the end of the ride that leads to the open sea. Standing on either side of the river was Dory and Brogy looking out at the horizon. "Look, it's the giants. They came to say goodbye," Usopp said happily. As they sailed in between the 2 giants, Brogy began to speak. "A great danger still lies ahead of you," he said while still looking forward. "It is an obstacle that has always been here, trying to prevent people from reaching the next island," Dory added, causing a few of the crew members to panic slightly. "Every one of you fought like true warriors trying to protect the pride of our duel," he said in a serious voice. "And because of that, no matter what enemy you face," Brogy said, continuing from where Dory left off. "We will never allow them to destroy your pride, friend," Dory said. "You must have faith in what we say and go straight. No matter what happens you must continue going straight," Brogy yelled, causing Luffy to nod his head before he spoke. "You heard that, Johnny, Yosaku?" Luffy asked while leaning over the rails slightly. "Aye," they yelled back. As soon as the ship sailed out of the river and into the open ocean, some very big started to come up from the water, causing everyone to hold onto something and scream. Out of the water came a giant goldfish big enough to swallow an entire island and was now getting ready to swallow the ship. "Johnny, Yosaku, work the rudder before we get eaten," Nami yelled from next to Luffy. But Luffy said to go straight. Johnny replied, "Keep going straight, guys." Luffy yelled out, causing everyone except Usopp to look at him as though he was suicidal. "Luffy, don't be ridiculous, this is not going to turn out like Laboon," Nijiko said, trying to get Luffy to understand. Luffy ignored all the cries and pleas and let the ship sail right into the beast's mouth. When the beast closed its mouth and began to swallow them, a sudden bright white light appeared behind the ship and everyone saw a wave of blue and red energy fly past the ship and pierce through the giant fish's throat while pushing the ship out the giant hole as well. After flying for a few seconds, the ship finally touched back down on the water and moving at a high rate of speed. Everyone looked behind them and saw the giant goldfish had a giant hole in his throat, and through the hole, everyone could see Dory and Brogy standing there holding broken weapons. "Well, that was fun," Luffy said before he turned towards Nami and spoke. "Get us on the right course for Alabasta," he said, causing her to nod her head and go down to the main deck. Luffy then looked to his 3 new crew members and spoke. "You 3 follow me," he said as he leads the 3 of them into the captain quarters. There was nothing too special in Luffy's room except for a bed, a writing desk and a closet. Luffy walked over to the bed and sat down before he looked at the 3 former bounty hunter and spoke. "I've had enough of all these code names, I want your real names," he said in a serious voice, causing the 3 of them to nod their heads. "Well, I'm Makita," Ms. Valentine said. "My real name is Gem," said Mr. 5 with his hands in his pocket. "And I'm Marianne," Ms. Goldenweek said while eating a rice cake. Luffy nodded his head before he spoke. "Well, I am sure the 3 of you know who I am," Luffy said while looking at the 3 of them, causing them to nod their head, confirming that they knew who he was. "Good, now about my plans for you 3, Luffy said, confusing them. "Plan? What plan?" Makita asked with a confused look on her face. "You see, after I take out Crocodile, Alabasta will become my territory and there are going to be a lot of Baroque Works agents who will suddenly be unemployed," Luffy said with a smirk. "The 3 of you along with any other high-ranking agents we get to join us will be in charge of the lower-ranked millions and billions," he said before he pulled out a glass and poured some whiskey in it for himself. "I see," Gem said, causing Luffy to look up at him. "You are going to create an organization like Baroque Works and you are going to put us in charge of it while you're away," he noted, causing the 2 females to look at Luffy in surprise. Luffy chuckled and took a sip of his whiskey before he replied. "You're close," he said, causing Gem to look at him, intrigued at what he had planned. "It is not an organization exactly. I am sure the 3 of you are familiar with or have at least heard of the black market or the underworld?" Luffy asked while looking up at them. The 3 of them looked at each other for a second before nodding their heads. "I don't know much about it, just that you buy illegal stuff there," said Makita, causing Marianne to nod her head, showing Luffy that it was the same for her. "That's fine, what the 3 of you are going to selling weapons, drugs, and very expensive things," Luffy said as he watching their reactions. He was surprised when none of them showed any outward reaction to what he said. "That can't be it, I'm sure there are numerous people out there who are doing the exact same thing," Gem said, causing Luffy to smile. "Right you are," Luffy said as he downed his drink. "We are also going to be dealing with rare artifacts and," he said before he reached under his bed and pulled out a chest and placed it on the bed. "Some extremely rare items," he said as he opened the chest and showed its contents to the 3 of them, causing their eyes to widen. "Those are," Nikita said in disbelief. "I've never seen one, much less this many," Marianne said in awe. "Wow," Gem said.